Hello, everyone. Now, I know that it's hard to keep up on top of what's going on in the Holy Land, but if you want to know more about what's happening here in Israel, I'm Aaron Porras, and this is the Weekly Review. Beginning north of Jerusalem at the Kalandia checkpoint in the West Bank, an Israeli guard lightly wounded in a drive-by shooting Wednesday morning. The attacker then fleeing towards Jerusalem and abandoning his car before finally being found hiding nearby. Border police finding a pistol in the car and detaining the suspect, later identified as a 36-year-old from the nearby Kfar Akab. The Kalandia checkpoint, situated between Jerusalem and Ramallah, has seen numerous terror-related incidents over the years, including just a few weeks ago when a Palestinian woman was shot dead mid-attack. A major breakdown in Vienna, ongoing nuclear talks between world powers and the Ayatollah regime in Iran coming to a standstill as Tehran reportedly freezes negotiations until mid-August at the earliest, this being just after the swearing-in of Iranian President-elect Raisi. Renewed nuclear negotiations between the P5+1 world powers and the Ayatollahs in Tehran seemingly stuck since June 20, and there's no sign that they'll resume anytime soon. Iranian authorities now saying that they have no intentions of restarting talks until at least mid-August, after Iranian President-elect Ebrahim Raisi begins his administration. Officials apparently asking for time to deal with the transition of office. Though the new Iranian administration in itself posing fresh problems, as Raisi, aka the hangman of Tehran, is already garnering sharp opposition worldwide, particularly by Iranian expats who recently took to the streets around the world in protest.
We want that the federal government of Germany initiate investigations against the regime, sanctions against the regime, and maximum pressure against the Iranian regime. Ali Khamenei is the godfather of terrorism, and Ibrahim Raisi is a mass murderer.
Additionally, Raisi is seen as a hardline proponent of the Iranian nuclear program, and Tehran, meantime, increasing its pro-nuclear rhetoric, a tried-and-true negotiating tactic as long as Iran claims it's for peaceful pursuits.
صنعت هسته‌ای ما با قدرت باقی موند و تو این ماهای اخیر بیشتر ظاهر شد و نشون داد که سازمان انرژی اتمی ما با چه توانمندی و قدرتش میتونه 20% تولید کنه، میتونه 60% تولید کنه. حتی اگر یه روزی نیاز داشته باشیم ما برای راکتوری 90% هم باشه ما میتونیم، ما مشکل نداریم، هر چه برای صلح‌آمیز در مسیر صلح‌آمیز هر کاری رو ما میتونیم انجام بدیم.
Regardless, Western powers are opting to continue with nuclear negotiations, arguing that they're the best path forwards. And this even as Iran at the same time violating negotiating powers' sovereignty, like how when alleged Iranian intelligence operatives in New York attempted to kidnap Iranian-American journalist and critic Masih Alinejad. At least 4 Iranian nationals now indicted in the plot.
We have never assessed Iran to be a good actor in the world, not just by this plot to kidnap a person who's residing in the U.S., but their activities in the region, which we have had great concern about, and the president has taken retaliatory actions for. But at the same time, we still see it in U.S. interest and in our national interest to engage in ongoing discussions so that we can have greater visibility into Iran's path to acquiring a nuclear weapon. So we will continue to pursue those talks, pursue the diplomatic path forward, which we think is in our interests and continues to be constructive.
That said, other, more aggressive options are seemingly still on the table. U.S. President Biden said to be inviting Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett to Washington in August, and with Iran and the nuclear deal reportedly topping the agenda. Israel has consistently railed against negotiations with Iran and, by extension, the JCPOA nuclear deal, arguing that Iran's existential threat against Israel and the region must not be underestimated. Finally, in that same vein, Israeli security establishments are requesting a massive budget increase of several billion shekels per year, the idea being to properly prepare for a potential attack against Iran's nuclear program. In other news, Foreign Minister Yair Lapid and his team returning to Israel from Brussels after a series of high-level meetings. A lot of them are going into quarantine on Tuesday, however, after an aide on Lapid's flight home tested positive for coronavirus. Luckily for Lapid and the others who've so far tested negative, quarantine regulations have just been cut amidst a slew of overnight changes. In line with previous promises to do the maximum against coronavirus while doing the minimum to the public, Israel's COVID cabinet releasing updated regulations overnight intending to streamline isolation procedures but still prevent a surge in infections.
במטרה להגביר את שיתוף הפעולה יחד עם הציבור ואת אמון הציבור, הקבינט החליט לאפשר למבודדים לבצע בדיקה ביום השביעי לבידוד שלהם, להמתין לתוצאה שלילית ואחרי תוצאה שלילית להשתחרר. יחד עם זה אנחנו נגביר את האכיפה על הפרות בעניין הזה, קרי אנשים שמשתחררים מבלי לבצע בדיקה, והקנס יעמוד על 5,000 שקלים.
Meanwhile, on top of shortening quarantines, the COVID cabinet deciding to emphasize the government's information campaign, including pressure to wear masks, get vaxxed, and avoid gatherings. Also, a rapid testing network will be made available to the public, and enforcement for not wearing masks will be increased, among other initiatives. Finally, with the new regulations, travel rules likewise shifting. So here's what you need to enter the country effective this Friday. 1. Prepare to take a COVID test at both ends of your travels. 2. Vaxxed or not, prepare to isolate for 24 hours in Israel upon arrival or until your negative COVID test results come back, whichever's first. 3. Unvaccinated adults without antibodies and children under 12 must isolate for at least 7 days as per the new regulations. 4. Perhaps most importantly, try to avoid traveling to any of these countries before coming to Israel. It guarantees an extended isolation, assuming you can enter at all. And finally, 5. Check for updates regularly. As we all know, the details can change at the drop of a hat. Still.
וביחד אנחנו ננצח את המגפה הזאת.
In what is truly the end of an era, after 12 years, former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his family left the Balfour residence, the official residence of the Prime Minister, on Saturday night. The move has been reportedly ongoing for the past week, as numerous cars belonging to Netanyahu's convoy were reported leaving the residence the past several days by Israeli media. Netanyahu's departure takes place nearly a month after he was replaced as Prime Minister. And while there's currently no law in Israel regarding a timeline for when the outgoing Prime Minister must leave the residence, Netanyahu and Bennett agreed that the family would vacate the complex by July 10th, and that until that time, no official meetings would be held at the residence. Now, the Netanyahu family will relocate to their house in Caesarea, and for the Balfour residence, it will undergo new security upgrades before Prime Minister Naftali Bennett will begin using the residence, though reportedly mainly to hold official meetings, as he and his family plan to remain in their current home in Ra'anana. And while Netanyahu was busy with the move, it seems former finance minister and Likud party member Israel Katz was busy with a move of his own. In an interview over the weekend to Israel's Channel 12 News, Katz, one of the most senior figures in the party, heavily criticized the former prime minister. Katz said that Netanyahu regularly takes credit for other people's work, saying that the success of the economy during the coronavirus pandemic was solely his and not Netanyahu's. The former finance minister said that Netanyahu was not involved at all in the economic recovery efforts, as he was busy with other things. Katz sees himself as Netanyahu's successor, and this is not the first time Katz has criticized the former prime minister. He recently made remarks saying that had Netanyahu stepped aside, he would have been able to form a government with the Likud still in power. Naftali Bennett said on Sunday at the weekly cabinet meeting that Israel was on high alert regarding the crisis in Lebanon.
בעניין לבנון, מדינת לבנון נמצאת על סף קריסה, כמו כל המדינות שאיראן משתלטת עליהן, והפעם אזרחי לבנון משלמים את המחיר. צריך להבין, אזרחי לבנון משלמים מחיר כבד בגלל ההשתלטות של איראן על המדינה. אנחנו עוקבים שם מקרוב אחרי המצב, גם שר הביטחון, שר החוץ ואנחנו נמשיך להיות דרוכים.
He made these remarks after Israeli security forces thwarted an attempt on Saturday to smuggle a large stash of weapons into Israel through Lebanon's border. In a preliminary investigation, police said 43 weapons and ammunitions were seized in total, estimated at 2.7 million shekels. The IDF said it was able to identify the smuggling attempt using both covert and overt methods. An investigation is ongoing as to whether the weapons were set to be used in Israel to carry out terrorist attacks on behalf of the Iranian-backed Hezbollah terrorist group. This latest incident marks the fifth attempt to smuggle weapons and the largest that has been thwarted by the IDF and the Israeli police since the beginning of the year.
Following a meeting in Brussels between Israel's Foreign Minister Yair Lapid and his Egyptian counterpart Sameh Shoukry, Israel is announcing that it will implement a series of relief measures for the Gaza Strip. Egypt has been mediating talks in Cairo between Israel and Hamas since the end of the 11-day conflict in Gaza in May. The relief plan including expanding the coastal enclave's fishing zone from 9 to 12 nautical miles, as well as approving additional imports and exports with the territory. Further, the plan calls for Qatar to continue monthly payments into the Strip to the tune of $30 million each. That's $10 million towards fuel purchases, $10 million towards assistance for families through Gaza's Postal Bank, and the rest for funding a Cash for Work program. Israel is, however, insisting on a change to the manner in which these hundreds of millions of dollars in humanitarian aid is being funneled into the region, announcing it will no longer permit the entrance of unmonitored cash. Instead, the Jewish state is demanding that an international observer such as the United Nations will facilitate the process to ensure funds are properly allocated, as opposed to falling into the hands of the Gaza terror groups like Hamas. Likewise, according to COGAT officials, these new relief measures will remain contingent on stability in the region, as well as on addressing the issue of the 4 Israeli captives currently being held by Hamas in Gaza. The 4 captives, including 2 Israeli citizens and the remains of 2 deceased IDF soldiers. Israel and Egypt have maintained a blockade on the Gaza Strip since 2007, when Hamas violently took control over the enclave. Now, in other news, while Israel's Knesset members were busy attacking one another, Israel's new president, Isaac Herzog, was speaking with Turkish President Erdogan in a landmark phone call. The pair spent roughly 40 minutes on the line and eventually agreed that for the benefit of regional security and stability, Israel and Turkey must return to their formerly good relations. Ties between the two states took a major hit back in 2010 following 2 major public incidents. The first, an embarrassing row between then Deputy Foreign Minister Dani Ayalon and Turkish Ambassador Ahmet Oguz Selikol, who was later recalled and not replaced for years. Then the second incident in 2010 alone being the Turkish flotilla event, or the killing of 10 Turkish activists aboard the Mavi Marmara, which attempted to violently breach the naval blockade around Gaza. In any case, with the new Israeli president and government in charge, this latest phone call could be the start to a whole new relationship, with Erdogan and Herzog both noting issues relating to the pandemic, trade relations, the Palestinians, and more. And now, this.
It is a great honor and privilege to stand here before you to officially open the Embassy of the United Arab Emirates in Tel Aviv.
Situated in the heart of the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange building, the UAE officially becoming the first Arab Gulf state to open an embassy in Israel, and its envoy hailing the bright future that lay in store with the further actualization of the Abraham Peace Accords. Deals already in the works between the two nations in the fields of economy, air travel, technology, culture, and more. And Israeli officials, for their part, likewise beaming with pride as peace spreads across the region. The nations of Sudan, Bahrain, and Morocco, among others, similarly warming with Israel.
The opening of this embassy is an important milestone in our shared journey towards a future of peace, prosperity, and security for the Middle East.
Moving now to the United States, over 2,000 participants joined outside Washington, D.C.'s Capitol building yesterday to rally against the recent rise in anti-Semitism that has struck across the Americas and abroad. This year, and particularly following the Israeli-Hamas conflict earlier in May, we've seen an alarming surge in anti-Semitic attacks, most recently including the stabbing of an Israeli rabbi in Boston. But while this weekend's rally highlights the nation's ability to come together to fight against hate, the event also showcases a massive disconnect between the American public's support of Jewry and support of the Jews' homeland, Israel. The Anti-Defamation League, the Jewish National Fund, and many other right-leaning organizations sponsored the event and came out to show their support. Likewise, many speakers at the rally equated anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, explaining that they are one and the same. And Minnesota Democratic Representative Ilhan Omar was personally chastised for allegedly inspiring violence and prejudice against Jews across the country. J Street and other left-wing Jewish organizations, on the other hand, declined to co-sponsor the rally, citing political differences. Meanwhile, Meghan McCain, the daughter of the late Senator John McCain, had some words of inspiration to share as well, saying, quote, "We cannot be quiet, we cannot be silent, and first and foremost, above all else, we cannot be scared," end quote. The Phoenix-born, non-Jewish McCain then also expressing the importance of condemning the hate of all Jews, regardless of the individual's political affiliation, claiming that America is a nation built on equality for all and not on selective acceptance. Moving on, a landmark moment for family rights in Israel. The High Court of Justice announcing on Sunday that all laws denying surrogacy rights from same-sex couples and from single men are unconstitutional. The dramatic decision to take effect within 6 months' time.
זה יום היסטורי לקהילת הלהט"ב בישראל, וזה יום היסטורי לחברה הישראלית כולה. זכות השוויון והזכות להורות קיבלו את המקום הראוי להן בסוגיה הקריטית של הקמת משפחה. אפליית זוגות חד-מיניים ואבות יחידנים תיפסק. זאת הייתה הפרה במשך שנים של ערכי היסוד של מדינת ישראל. וכן, גם לזוגות מאותו מין ולאנשים יחידים, אבות יחידים, גברים יחידים, יש זכות שלמה להיות הורים ולהקים משפחה בישראל באמצעות הסדר פונדקאות.
An 11-year legal battle finally ending, and surrogacy rights being extended to single Israeli men and Israeli same-sex couples. The fight starting in earnest in 2010 with a petition to the court by Itai Pinkas Arad and his partner Yoav Arad Pinkas. Additionally, the latest ruling follows a high court decision in February 2020, which gave the Knesset a 1-year deadline to pass a new, indiscriminate surrogacy law. Until now, partnering with a surrogate in Israel was an option only available to heterosexual couples and to single mothers, provided the single mom's own eggs were used in the surrogacy. In any case, though, the deadline has come and gone. So last week, the state requested that the court advance its decision ahead of September. And voila, the ban on LGBTQ or single-father surrogacies now set to lift in half a year, the 6-month period meant to give government offices time to adjust to the new ruling. And both the Israeli petitioners, the LGBTQ community, and the health minister, openly gay Meretz party leader Nitzan Horowitz, are applauding the decision as cleaning a stain from Israel's robust legal system.
זה הישג אדיר של הקהילה הגאה, ובראשה אנשים מסורים, כמו שני האנשים האלה, בני זוג, איתי פינקס ויואב ארד, חברים שלי, שהגישו את העתירה הזאת לפני שנים, ונאבקו כנגד מה שנראה קושי בלתי עביר, כנגד כל הסיכויים.
אנחנו באמת מתרגשים גם בשם הקהילה הגאה, אבל אני חושב שההחלטה הזאת והמהלך, כל הדרך הזאת, 12 השנים שעברו מאז שהתחלנו לצעוד בה, הביאו היום לתוצאה שהיא מאוד חשובה. היא חשובה לא רק למי שעשויים ליהנות ולהביא ילדים לעולם, אלא בעיניי כל מקום בספר החוקים שמפלה אותנו אפליה שרירותית, בין אם זה הקהילה הגאה או בין אם זה כל קבוצה אחרת, זה כתם על ספר החוקים של מדינת ישראל, וכל יום שכתם כזה נמחה הוא יום חג למדינה, הוא יום חג לחברה שלנו.
Moving on, another incredible archaeological discovery in the old city of Jerusalem, and curiously, the find actually settling a long-held debate. ILTV's Chana Rifkin with the details.
Excavators with the Israel Antiquities Authority confirming that they've uncovered the eastern section of Jerusalem's outer walls. The previously thought missing section connecting to the other sections of the wall discovered decades ago, and proving beyond a doubt that the capital of Judea's perimeter was indeed protected by a single massive fortification. A fortification that met its end nearly 2,607 years ago today.
The Babylonians arrive here in 586 BC and destroy the city of Jerusalem and the first temple. Remains of this destruction were uncovered here in recent excavations of a building just inside the wall. However, they did not destroy this segment of the wall, which remains standing till today.
Meanwhile, other discoveries include a bulla inscribed with the name Tzafan, a Babylonian stamp seal, and so much more.
We found a number of storage jar handles which were stamped either with lamelech belonging to the king stamp, or with concentric circles, or with rosettas. These teach us about Judean bureaucracy, administration from sometime in the 8th century BC until the Babylonian destruction.
The findings in full will be presented by the IAA this October at the Conference for New Studies in Archaeology of Jerusalem and its region. And
our final story tonight, an exceptionally rare glimpse into ancient history. a shard from a clay vessel that may have belonged to the famous Gideon of the biblical book of Judges. For the first time ever, Israeli archaeological experts are revealing an inscription that both refers to the biblical book of Judges and dates back to that same time. In fact, the artifact in question may have even belonged to the famous Judge Gideon, aka Yerubal. A shard from a ceramic jug inscribed with the name Yerubal was discovered at the Kirbat Erai site in the Shahariar forest of the KKL JNF. And the shard, dating back to around 1100 BCE, or over 3,100 years ago, perfectly aligns with the First Iron Age, as well as the time of Judges as described in the Bible. In addition, this is the first time in history that the name Yerubal has been found outside of the Bible and in an archaeological context.
זאת פעם ראשונה בארכיאולוגיה של ארץ ישראל, שיש לנו כתובת ברורה מהתקופה שנקראת ברזל אחד, שהיא בעצם תקופת השופטים. עד היום אם נמצאו כתובות מתקופה זו, הייתה בהם אות או שתיים או מין טקסט לא ברור. וכאן פעם ראשונה לנו שם שאפשר להבין אותו, והשם הוא ירובעל. ירובעל מופיע במסורת המקראית כשמו השני של גדעון, אחד השופטים.
Of course, when working with artifacts of this age, nearly everything is an educated guess, and the geographical context in which the shard was discovered lends credence to the theory of coincidence. Professors Garfinkel and Ganor explaining that the name Yerubal was evidently in common usage at the time, and so while the owner may have been the very same Gideon as mentioned in the Bible, this inscription may just as easily be referring to another Yerubal. The Judge Gideon is first mentioned in the Bible as fighting against idolatry, and he's most often remembered for his triumph against the Midianites. And that's it for ILTV's Weekly Review. I'm Aaron Porras. See you next week.